So I wanted to do a short video to tell you some tips on 8 tips on how to paint the best way possible in my class. So the first thing is this. What would you do first? And the first thing, I would make sure I have all 5 things here: paper, paintbrush, water, paper towel, and paint. And before we start, you might also want to do one thing here I always say is to put what on your paper first. That's right, put your name on your paper first before we get it all wet with paint. Then students begin to paint in my class, and I see all kinds of crazy things like, I'm ready, Mr. Grant, and they paint all over the paper, which is pretty wild. So the first question I have for you is, what do you do next after your name is on the paper? And the answer is, you activate the paint. Activate. And what that means is you got to add water to the paint. Most students think that adding more paint to their paper makes it better, and what it does is it ruins the paint and it ruins the paper when you take your brush and you jam your brush in it and you scrub it real hard, and then you scrub it real hard on the paper. What it does is it breaks the bristles on the brush and it tears apart the paint. So what I always tell students is to always use more water. Okay, that's your second tip to wet the paint. Tip number 3 is, how do you hold a paintbrush? Is this the way we hold a paintbrush, like this and scribble? No, we do not do that. The other students most know that you hold your paintbrush chink, 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 like a pencil, which means you pinch it and you rest it on your hand. Now there's many ways to hold a paintbrush, but do you think we should hold it up here to paint? No, Mr. Grant, that's not a good idea, because then you don't have control. I recommend that you hold it down by the metal ferrule when you're beginning to paint. Okay, so the next tip, that's tip 3, is how to hold a brush. Tip 4 would be how to use the brush. So I'm going to pick a paint color, so I'm probably going to always pick black first if I'm going to draw with it. So let's get a little paint on there, and I'm pressing lightly. And what most people do, and we're going to just draw a simple shape and make something out of that shape today. So most people take their brush in kindergarten, they push the bristles down to make a shape. Okay, now watch what I do. I'm going to rinse my brush off and I'm going to try again. This time I'm not pushing the bristles all the way down. I'm only going to use the very eensy little tip. And if you're holding the paintbrush right, and you have the right amount of water on there, and you try to do another version of a circle, voila! Well, it's not a perfect circle. There is a big difference here between a messy paint and a nice and clean tip of my brush paint. Pretty cool. The other thing is, if you make a mistake, you don't need to throw your paper away. I made a mistake. I can always flip my paper to the back and restart, or I can try to use what I have and turn it into something new. That's part of being an artist, is learning how to adapt and innovate. Okay, so the next thing is this. I'm going to use black first, and I need to let that dry. And so my tip number, is it 4? No, number 4 is how to use the tip. Now keep in mind, we're going to use the side of the brush as well. So far we use the tip to draw the lines. Okay, and tip number 5 would be what colors we use first. Okay, so I use black first to draw my lines, and then what color would you use next? Does it really matter? It does matter. So what I would use next is the brightest color. So if I'm going to use yellow in my artwork, which is the brightest color I have other than white, I would definitely want to use this first, because yellow gets the most messy first. Okay, what a lot of students do is they'll use a color like blue on their artwork, and then they'll take the blue and stick it in the yellow and mess up the yellow paint. And it's okay, because we can fix that with another tip. Okay, so whatever you do, use the brightest colors first. Okay, and we're using the side of the brush now instead of the tip when we color in with the color filling. Okay, so the next tip is how to use your paintbrush. This is tip, I believe, number 6, if I'm keeping track. How to use your paintbrush as an eraser. So a lot of teachers, parents, and students don't know this secret tip. So the way I do that is I take my brush and I slide and I squeeze the water out of it so it's completely dry. And then watch this. It sucks up all the bad paint. I got to do that just a couple times. And after I do that a couple times, Wow, look at that, it's brand new. So now my paints are not ruined. Most likely you'll get a paint that's all mixed up from another class. So that's the best way to clean it off. Then I rinse my brush off again. And notice what I did there. This is tip number 6, I almost always forget. Do not tap your brush. I started to do it myself, if you noticed. Don't tap it because it splatters water on everybody else's artworks. So what I want you guys to do is to slide to the right, whoops, slide to the left. We slide the water off our brush, and that's the better way of getting the water off without getting water on everybody else's artwork around us and having a little argument about that. And you can also use your paper towel to dab paint off if you get a paint spill. But I'm only going to give you one more tip today, and that is this. The best part about painting. So I can tell if someone knows how to paint, because what I notice is when someone colors with crayons, you cannot mix crayons. You cannot mix markers very well, and you cannot mix colored pencils very well, but you know what does mix paints and colors very well? Paint. That's right. Paint works really well with mixing. So one of the things I'd recommend is whatever you paint today, do a little bit of blending. So in other words, make sure there's plenty of water. Notice I'm going to the water the most, not the paint the most. And I'm adding a little bit of red paint in here. I'm going to clean my brush off, and I'll try to use another color, maybe blue, a darker color. And let's overlap it with some water. And this paper is not the best. It's absorbing really, really fast, so I'm not getting a very good blend. But that's my last tip, is to do a little bit of mixing. And you can see my paper starting to shred up already, because if you press too hard, you will rip a hole through your paper. See? It rips a hole through it. But also, I wasn't pressing hard and my paper ripped. That's just the quality of the paper. It's not always your fault. So that's my tips for today. Thanks for watching.